Greetings and welcome back to another discussion. I'm joined by the legendary and seldom seen, or heard rather, Colttaine. You've been asking about Colttaine. Well, Colttaine's been quite busy with many things. He has a real life, in contrast to mine. So, yeah, he's not often heard in these parts. But in any event, there have been a number of events in recent times that are perhaps worthy of discussion. First and foremost on the list is, well, I guess it was inevitable, the guffaw or cock-up on the part of Kraut and Tea, which, of course, individually has been dealt with. Many people went out and made videos about it, alternative hypothesis, millennial woes, pale hominid, some random people, etc., etc. The French-Canadian guy. But, JFG, I guess. But, and there's thus far been no discussion about that. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of biased towards Kraut and Tea because he seems to be driven by a vendetta to produce these videos. Now, the first video on RNK was, in parts at least, technically not incorrect. But this most recent video, it seems, is really beyond the pale in terms of, I guess, inaccuracies and just sort of twisting the data. So I'll just turn over the mic to Colttaine to hear what he has to say, because he's much more sympathetic towards Kraut and Tea than I am. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess in the RNK selection video, I think he got most of it right. I mean, there was a few small minor things, like there was one part I recall where he mentioned that, every animal falls on the selection spectrum, sexual selection spectrum, with the exception of sterile animals like mules, which I don't think is technically accurate. I mean, shit, you can get the snip as a person, you still want to fuck. Like, the fact that mules are sterile doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't have some type of sexual, behavior. But I think, it's fairly incidental to the main point of the video. But as I said in my video pseudo-response to him, I don't know, it's fine making those videos, but and I learnt this the hard way. You have to make those videos for the right reason, and I don't think he has, and now he's really put his foot in it. The whole, if you can't point to the gene, it didn't happen thing. I mean, it's just wrong on every conceivable level, that you can't rely on quantitative research rather than qualitative. I mean, Darwin didn't know about Mendel's work when he came up with the theory of evolution by means of natural selection. Mendel obviously didn't know about DNA, which wasn't, turned into a working model until, over half a century later. The fact that we don't know what every specific gene does doesn't mean that we can't say anything specific about things like the heritability of IQ. I mean, twin studies, when we compare fraternal to identical twins, we can actually say quite a bit about the heritability of IQ. The thing that really baffles me about it is that taking that position is just, in the long run, it's really counter to Kraut's position. At some point, like, if you got these people who sort of do have the strong, I don't know what the correct word for it is, since so much of it's kind of been sullied by the social justice movement. But assuming that you do look at some of these social problems, like the disparity between black people and white people, like economically and crime and that sort of thing, assuming that you do actually want to fix these problems, I don't see how you can even begin to assess and approach these problems until you admit what the underlying cause is. Like, the fact that, like, Kraut has taken this like he's just denying the science at this point, to me would be counter to his end goal of wanting to fix these problems.
Yeah, but I think we're overlooking a powerful factor here, which is people's stubbornness, their egos, and their inability to concede certain points.
But I mean, this is from people who are, quote unquote skeptics, though. I mean, it's.
I don't think. I don't know if Kraut. I mean, in his defense, right? In his defense, I don't believe Kraut ever called himself a skeptic. I don't even know if skeptics refer themselves as skeptics in much the same way that SJWs don't call themselves SJWs. I think skeptic is a term that has that people have come up with from outside the skeptic community. For example, I'm not a skeptic, so I call them skeptics because they're not really skeptical. It's just an ironic term.
Well, I don't know if it is entirely an ironic term. I mean, you look at some of the big names in that sort of sphere of people. I mean, the biggest name that comes to my mind is Thunderfoot. And Thunderfoot absolutely did come from the skeptic community.
Yes, okay. So there was a time when there was a fixed fixed quantity of people that could be referred to as skeptics.
Yeah.
However, over time, these things sort of became dilapidated, and we don't really know who's a skeptic, who's not. We have a kind of broad basket that we can put people in. So Sargon is kind of a skeptic, sort of. But yeah, I mean, in theory, you're correct that if you want to push an agenda of quote unquote social justice, the best way to approach that would be to look at the root causes.
Well, I'd liken it to this analogy. Say your car's broken down and you go to the mechanic and you say, the whole thing about like all of the data that we have basically says it's socioeconomics is the main root cause of the problem. And the main cause of the socioeconomic problem is general disparities in, general intelligence
capacity,
cognitive capacity. I kind of liken it to these people that just don't want to hear anything about cognitive capacity and, will dance around the subject and do everything else. It's like taking your car to a mechanic and saying, my car's broken down, but I don't want you to diagnose what the problem is. I just want you to start randomly replacing parts until the car starts working again. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that with an automobile. And I don't understand, if you actually legitimately want to fix these social issues, why you wouldn't go to the root cause of what is, underlying them.
Mm. Well, once again, I think I've seen this repeatedly. I made an entire video about this where I talked about a number of things, including mortality salience, as well as the fact that when pressed and pushed, and people have been representing a certain viewpoint for such a long time, it's very, very difficult to retract those views. I mean, once again, I don't think. And this is the fundamental problem with ideology, is that ideology by its very nature, kind of explain this in my video about what sort of is everything ideology, has a bunch of assumptions that aren't really, you can't really liken hypotheses. They're not, ideological assumptions are not assumptions that people want to test to see if they're valid or not, or accurate, or what have you. They're assumptions about the world that are effectively assumptions about how you want the world to be, how you want it to be, rather than how it is. And so you can't really repudiate your own assumptions about how you want the world to be if they're basically just desires. It's like saying, well, what you're always saying is how you'd like to be rich, but how does it happen? Well, maybe you play a lottery, etc. I mean, we might want to be extremely wealthy, but the cause and effect there isn't present for us, and so it's very unlikely we will be. so we have to live with that reality. But with these other things, not so much. I mean, you can just, I want the world to be X, okay. So the Kraut and Tea, if you want to say that Kraut and Tea has a social justice agenda,
well, I don't know. Like I said, it's
okay, bettering society, whatever, improving
terms, but
right,
yeah,
improving society. Let's say an agenda or desire to improve society. Well, that is part of that is to look at people as effectively identical in their cognitive capacity, in their physical capacity, and all these. Well, maybe not so much physical. You might conceive that in all of these things. But it's not a testable hypothesis in the sense that he's not going, maybe that's incorrect. Maybe maybe to improve society. If improving society is the goal, there needs to be a series of tests that can explore the best possibilities or best means of achieving that goal. However, once again, it's not ideological assumptions are not hypotheses about things. Now, for example, I've said this many times. I think a very interesting hypothesis that you, in theory, could test was what would happen if we did nothing about the sort of cognitive difference between the white-black population in the United States and just got rid of all the government welfare. What level of improvement would see? Would it be sufficient to perhaps not close the gap, but at least vastly improve things such that this is an actual experiment. In theory, we'll never see this, that you could conduct, say, retract government intervention in the Black American community for 30 or 40 years to see if there's going to be a marked improvement. But I mean, that's something you can actually, in theory, test.
It's something that you could, in theory, test, but at the same time, this is one of those things where we're kind of at a stalemate at this point because that's never going to happen.
No, I agree.
Like society is like, I mean, to the extent that even if you agreed with, the sentiments of white ethno-nationalists in the US, for example, it's not a feasible goal at this point. They're fantasies about the Turner Diaries and stuff notwithstanding, you're not going to be ever in a position where you're going to deport all the Hispanic and black people. Like, it's just not going to happen. That's America. It is a, for lack of a better term, a melting pot of, culture. So on the one hand, that's not going away. On the other hand, the people who do want to change this aren't willing to look at, things like IQ and what has to be done to equalize some of these differences. Like, it just seems like a complete stalemate. I don't see it improving whichever way you go.
Well, no, I think at this stage, the only possible improvement would be something like germline. I mean, that's a separate topic, but direct genetic intervention. I mean, intervention at the level of the genome, okay?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that...
Well, I'm not even talking about that. I mean, I think there's things that could be done now. I think direct intervention at the genome is something that could be done later. In any case, I think that, again, if you said, well, let's, tweak African American genes so that they, we can tweak, like, assuming that we got to the point where we knew which genes and gene clusters and stuff contributed towards general intelligence. If we started targeting ethnic groups in that way, I don't think that would go down particularly well.
Well, no.
Like, what I'm talking about is that the people, there's stuff that could be done now to improve. As you said, cut off all welfare and, hopefully some of these, communities that have pretty much become welfare reliant would hopefully begin to course correct themselves. But the people that have the power to do that are not going to do that.
Well, no.
Like, like I said, it's a stalemate. The problem's not going for the white nationalists and ethno-nationalists. That problem is just a fact. It's not going away. And to the people on the other side, the social justice crowd, for lack of a better term, they're not willing to do what needs to be done to solve the problems that exist now. It looks like it's just a huge social stalemate where people are going to get louder and louder at each other on social media platforms, and nothing is ever going to change in any kind of meaningful way.
Yeah, I likely agree with you on that. But I think this is the thing, getting back to the original point, that people coming from an ideological platform, they're not looking for data. They'll take data. They'll take data that will support their position. They will reject data that do not support their position. And I mean, it's clear that Kraut and Tea has an ideological platform.
Yeah, and I mean, it's unfortunate too, because I mean, you got to think about it in terms of what people can you reach. Well, I mean, Kraut is a guy who has regularly been called a Nazi white supremacist himself by, you know, people further to the left than he is. Like he's regularly been labelled a Nazi sympathiser, which he's clearly not. But I mean, to the extent that he seems to be about as far on the left as you can get approaching these problems, and he still isn't. Like even he isn't willing to accept the cold hard science underlying some of these problems.
Yeah. Well, I
think it's. I think it's a worry because as long as people on the left don't address this stuff, it's going to remain. The more guys like Kraut don't address these issues in terms of how they could approach it to make society better, all they're really doing is pushing more and more people towards the alternative hypothesis and the Richard Spencers of the world. As long as those people are, I don't think they're unbiased either. I mean, I think they have their own agendas, but as long as they are actually addressing the actual science as it currently stands, the left is just going to be pushing more and more people in that direction. I mean, I think you briefly mentioned in a recent video the private talk that we had about comparing, I guess, ethno-nationalism, white nationalism to, you know, the effectiveness of men's rights. When you sort of look at
demonetized, by the way, officially they said it wasn't suitable because bad topic, whatever. Yeah,
good old YouTube. But you know, when you consider that in the last 3 to 4 decades, men's rights activism, the men's rights movement has effectively achieved nothing. Whereas, you know, Richard Spencer, love him or hate him, he got punched in the face and that turned into an international debate about using violence against people you politically agree with. The alt-right, white nationalists, for all intents and purposes, Nazi sympathizers have gotten so much more effective media coverage over the last 12 months. I mean, it shows you how little people care about men's rights by comparison, but I think by that same token as well, you have to look at some of the things that cause that, and I think a lot of what's caused that over the last 12 months is things like Antifa and Hillary Clinton. Like the left, over the last 12 months, the left has basically created more extreme right-wing people than, you know, the right wing could have ever hoped to.
Yeah.
The best recruiter for the right is the left at the moment.
I agree with that. I think, and I explained in that video, which was officially reviewed and officially regarded as unsuitable for advertisers, that this is all just the way men operate. Men only operate under the banner of tribalism for the reasons I cited, hierarchy.
Well, I don't think it's just men, like women as well. Women don't care about the ordeals of men. I think it's just a general...
No, I agree with you. I'm saying that men, compare and contrast women's rights, quote-unquote women's rights, with men's rights. Women have been tremendously effective in pushing for women's rights. I'm saying that the reason why you have something like white nationalism being so appealing to men is, for one thing, it's easy. You're white European, you're automatically in the club. You don't have to do anything to join it. And it gives you a sense of community. Whereas, like I said, I think it goes back down to the roots that if you just go along the lines of men's rights, well, every man is a potential competitor for reproductive success, so you can't have that. But if you align yourself in a group of quote unquote, you know, genetic or pseudogenetic relatives, is quite different.
Yeah, well, on that very note, I mean, it's interesting that, the alt-right and white nationalism, so much of it is sort of centered around protecting the poor white women from the evil big black cocks too. A lot of that white ethno-nationalism is ultimately about the women and children.
Well, of course, I said that it's a reproductive movement. That's what the alt-right is largely.
Yeah. But yeah, by comparison, it's kind of like, if you look at it as a zero-sum game, the alt-right and white nationalism and all of that sort of stuff is still somewhat based around the what's best for the women of our group. Whereas men's rights is always kind of like, no matter which way you slice it, is in many ways diametrically opposed to the...
Let me subtly disagree there. I think specifically alt-right and white nationalism is about reproductive disenfranchisement. In most cases, there are some gay guys and what have you, and guys that have already reproduced. But the 25-something white guy in the United States who is of average means and intelligence, or looks or whatever, he's probably, most of those guys are getting the shaft at this stage of the game. For a variety of reasons. And so, yeah, I think it really has to do with feeling disenfranchised from reproductive accessibility. Yeah. It's basically about reproductive accessibility. It's not so much, I don't know if they really care per se about quote-unquote white women so much as they would like access to their vaginas and then consequently reproductive access to them. And like I said, common tribal lines. We'll call this pseudogenetic because, I mean, there's so much distance between people. But in the United States, sort of pseudogenetic perception of white Americans, they can sort of white male, young male Americans sort of band together along these lines, and in theory would. And there are females that there's Tara McCarthy, there's a Brittany Pettibone, and these occasional females that get involved as well.
Very good at capitalizing on the thirsty desires of desperate men.
Yeah, I doubt that Brittany Pettibone paid for her intro, which you, through expert analysis, confirmed that she absolutely did not do herself. But yeah, I don't...
Yeah. Well, I'd agree with most of what you've said there. I guess my point was that, I mean, I guess the MRA is somewhat about sexual disenfranchisement as well. I mean, they're always carrying on about how, the evil Marxist feminism has destroyed the family, and if only it wasn't for feminism, all of these wonderful goddesses had come back to them or whatever. Feminism's corrupted them. But I think there is some fundamental differences as well, where some of the stated interests, and I don't know, I always. It's hard to pin down because whenever you say, the stated interest is the MRM, you're going to have some fucking idiot like Peter Wright come along and, the MRM isn't about politics, it's about the cultural narrative or whatever. But as an example, if you were to say breast cancer gets 10 times the amount of research funding that prostate cancer gets, it's somewhat of a zero-sum game. That trying to even that out is always going to be perceived as you trying to take money away from women's issues. So I guess in that sense, like men's rights is kind of diametrically opposed to a lot of female interests, where I don't really see the alt-right having that same issue.
No.
To the extent that they are sexually disenfranchised, it's a reproductive movement. They're not necessarily trying to take anything away from women either. They're still kind of about the protection of women and children and all of that.
Yeah. Although I have to say, being somewhat familiar with the alt-right, there are definitely streams of thought which suggest, the wrenching away of women's rights and denying them the vote.
Yeah, but I mean, even Black Pigeon has to really kind of dance around that subject when he talks about it.
When he's hard pressed, yes, that's true. It did come to the fore in that one discussion some time back.
The alt-right women weren't happy hearing that shit.
Well, no. I mean, I guess anyone wouldn't be, but yeah, at least he was partly honest. He did say that he doesn't think that women should have gotten the vote, and I know you have your own views on that. And
yeah, I mean, I don't agree with him. I mean, I think if anything, you take the right of women away to vote, you still have the problem that the majority of problems have happened because of men at the behest of women. You can take away their right to vote, but men are still going to fucking pander.
Well, I've said this
pussy.
before, on this particular topic, that basically, sort of restructuring the world, whether it's what the men's rights activists want or sort of traditionalist alt-right people want, restructuring the world in that way would require a kind of, I wouldn't call it cruelty, but a degree of disregard towards female kind that I doubt many people would be willing to endorse, at the very least publicly, and perhaps also not privately. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, for example, something that no one would ever entertain, why not just disallow for the education of women? Return them to, I mean, barring all the fact that it's completely unfeasible, but never mind. I mean, then you just get, supplicant women who required male industry and resources, and they're all, but people aren't willing to do that. And so, I mean, you're kind of just left in this stalemate. And women, as we know, are not particularly tribal in an ethnic sense. I think there are, as I said in that video, good reasons for that. There's no need because they have maternal assurance of their offspring. I think historically, it was part of a survival strategy. War bride.
I think, I mean, it wasn't one of your most popular videos, but I think as far as the actual information and relevance goes, I think one of your most hard-hitting videos on that topic was the assortative mating video.
Yeah.
Which really kind of goes over a lot of that stuff, where women don't really need to have when women have a baby, they know it's theirs, it comes out of them. But guys, things like eye color and things. There are statistical reasons why a man would prefer a woman that looks more like him as far as paternity assurance is concerned.
That's part of it, yeah. And, so, I mean, there are all these factors, and I think that, I mean, the real question is anyone going to achieve anything that they claim to want to achieve? And I think at this state, you look at something like alt-right or white nationalism in general, that's very much an American thing, perhaps an Australian thing. In Europe, people have different nationalities, and although the majority of them are, of course, white, they don't really, a Polish person isn't the same as a German person just because they're white. So I think it's very much an American thing, and I just don't see it really happening anytime soon, achieving any actual power, if only because the people in power are opposed to them. Vehemently in some cases.
Yeah, I mean the people are opposed to them. As I said before, I don't see you deporting, all the Hispanics and black people and Jews and whoever else you hate out of America. And on top of that, you also have the problem that, as just discussed, white women aren't necessarily going to jump on your bandwagon cause. You look at the women that have, your Brittany Pettibones and your Lauren Southerns, attractive young women that have managed to capitalize and make a lot of money out of the whole situation. But when you see something like the Charlottesville riots and stuff, I don't see a lot of women marching with the, the alt-right guys. I don't see them kind of getting with the cause.
Yes and no. I think it's a matter of power. Women, of course, like status and power. Now, if through some unforeseen circumstance or series of events, something like the alt-right or akin to the alt-right were to manage to grab onto some decent, significant degree of power, then
Yeah.
women would just flip their switch and they would become white nationalists, white women at least.
Yeah, I mean, shit, man. You look at gaming and comic book films. I mean, women don't give a fuck about any of that. They care about the millions of dollars that industry's become. But
or the power. So you have political power as a group or as a ideology. That they become white nationalists. But until that happens, no, they're not going to get on board in large numbers.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, I think getting back to the original point about Kraut and Tea, it's not a mentality I can relate to. I want to learn if I'm mistaken about things, and I don't really have a particular. I don't really want the world to be a certain way. I'd like certain goals to be achieved, but I try to just look at the world as best as I can understand it as it is. And that's not something that coincides with a kind of viewpoint that Kraut and Tea would advocate. Or for that matter, alternative hypothesis. I mean, I have this idea. Of course, you couldn't run this experiment. What I would love to see is you take two states in the United States, right, of similar resource availability, geography, topography, all this stuff. One state, you run an experiment for half a century, 50 years, in ridiculous detail, where it's an IQ state, right? Everyone from different ethnic groups, they all have a minimum required of 120 or 130 or something like that, versus a purely sort of white European state, to see which, in all matters of indices of happiness, achievement, productivity, all these things, which achieves more. I'd like to see your experiment run like that, as you could actually then see. Oh my God! I apologize.
That construction.
It's right next to me this time. Holy shit! That scared the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Not much I can do about it. But to see that experiment run, just to observe what the best results of that would be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're not operating in a complete knowledge vacuum here. I'm fairly certain that if you did that, the outcome would be that the IQ state would outperform the ethno state.
In terms of productivity, I'm not so sure about contentment or happiness, but yeah.
Well, I think they probably would too. I think prosperity drives happiness. Like, for instance, I know I've said this before, but you look at, things like the Putnam study, where it shows that people in San Francisco are a lot unhappier than someone in like bumfuck Minnesota, for example. That may well be true, but I'd still be willing to bet that the average person in San Francisco is still a hell of a lot happier than someone living in like Lagos, Nigeria, where the whole place is a shithole. I think
those are maybe false equivalents. I mean, like I said, it might be in these scenarios that this drilling. I'm sorry, I apologize to the audience. It's fucking this new place. Anyway, it might be that there are different. You achieve different things. So, for example, an ethno-state or a white ethno-state would be less productive and would achieve less than an IQ state, but people would, get along or just feel a sense of community more than another than another state.
Perhaps, but I don't know. I think having looked at a lot of the data with ethnic fractionalization and GDP per capita and crime rates and stuff, I think that if the IQ state could like radically outperform the ethno state to the extent where they did have a higher quality of life, where they were getting more money and working less hours and all of that sort of stuff, I think the outcomes of that better lifestyle would probably trump whatever problems are caused by ethnic fractionalization.
Yeah, it's certainly possible, but that's the thing. We need to run that experiment, but we can't.
Yeah.
For the reasons mentioned prior relating to Kraut and Tea and the whole topic being taboo to begin with.
Yeah. Well, it's you can't. I mean, assuming that we didn't have the kind of left-wing social biases that we do at the tops of most Western sort of social democracies, like, even if you were to come at this purely from the angle of like raw science, I still wouldn't see something like that getting past your average ethics board.
Oh, no, well, that's the whole point. People would consider an experiment like that unethical, but it's an experiment, I think, that would be very fruitful long term as gauging all kinds of things.
I guess I'm in the position, I kind of see myself as somewhere in the middle of it all, where I do actually have, a way that I would like to see the world. I would like everyone to be, I'd like to see everyone's quality of life increased. I'd like to see everyone earning more and, working less hours and stuff. I guess I'm in the position where I'm like, whilst I would like to see that, I also know enough to be fairly pessimistic about it ever happening, because I do look at stuff like, general like group differences in average IQ and the fact that nobody wants to address it. And I'm like, well, as much as I'd like to see it get fixed, it's not a problem that's ever going to be addressed in any kind of considerable way.
I don't think it. Well, the only silver lining, if you want to call it that, would be the continuing amassing, as it were, of all this information and data as molecular genetics improves and gains in ground, and it begins to correlate more and more with what quantitative genetics seems to indicate and tell us. Then over time, when you have such a mass and preponderance of evidence, you become effectively the sort of young Earth creationist who's telling you about the story of the dinosaurs and the encephalopods and the monotremes and all this stuff, and you just kind of laugh. They're kind of the idiot in the room, and I think we will get to that stage, because, or you'll get to the kind of parallel society for a while where publicly everyone pretends that young Earth creationism is true. But when they go home, when they go to work, they actually do the science, and they obviously take into account evolution and actual geology and what have you. Those are the two scenarios I see forthcoming. Either the weight of the evidence just crushes people's ability to even present arguments, and because that Kraut and Tea's whole argument is a God of the gaps argument, basically. Yeah,
well, he's pretty much the young Earth creationist of this this issue. But I mean, to be honest with you, and I agree, that could eventually happen with enough evidence amassed over a long enough period of time. But to put it into perspective, I've just pulled up the Wikipedia page about level of support for evolution. I'm just, for the sake of audience, I've skipped right down to the United States. So according to 2009 Pew Research surveys of the public, 31% young Earth creationist, 22% believe in evolution guided by supreme being, and 32% believe in evolution due to natural processes. So the fact that, a third of the US population in 2009 still believed in young Earth creationism, to the extent that it's possible, I don't see it happening in my lifetime.
So, Colttaine, then the second scenario I propose is more likely, if that's the case, at least in the United States, which is a kind of intellectual parallel society where publicly people believe certain things, but then they go to work and they work with actual SNPs and they look they're looking at the genome and they might say everyone's the same and blah blah blah, and then they go actually do the work, and it's just kind of like the party line, like of the Communist Party. Communists towards the end of the Soviet Union not only believed the party line anymore, they knew it failed. It had largely failed, or almost entirely. But they just, it was just for the sake of group cohesion and unity. And you might still have the same thing. We're already seeing this. People, what you get with scientists is that they do their research but won't talk about it publicly. So, for example, in the case of the late C.S. MGTOW, this was years ago, he tried to contact a bunch of neuroscientists who examine sex differences in the brain, and that's all they do, that's their job, but they wouldn't talk about it publicly. So I think we'll get a scenario like that. The only thing is when because there's going to be a threshold. I've said this many times. Oh, thanks to the drilling again. Where you get it's hard to focus with this noise. So medical stuff is great. Oh, we have a genetic solution to cystic fibrosis. Fantastic. We have a genetic solution to Down syndrome. Fantastic. All this great stuff, right? But then when people want to do cosmetic changes or cognitive, basically make themselves smart, then it might become fishy.
Yeah.
And at some point in time, they won't be denied that anymore.
Well, it is. It's still a controversial topic now, like with some of the stuff that we do know. For example, when I did sent my genetic materials to 23andMe, you have to actually you have to actually opt in to see the SNPs related to Alzheimer's, for example. Which I did, and unfortunately, you don't always get the SNPs you want, and apparently the SNP involved with Alzheimer's wasn't scanned with me, so I have no idea what the outcome of that was. But there's still basically the reason that it's opt-in is because there is so many people that, despite having that information about their own genome at their fingertips, they don't want to know.
Well, yeah, but then again, my family has a history of coronary problems and little to no cancer, so it's unlikely that cancer will claim me, much more likely that coronary problem will claim me.
I'm fucked. I got a family history of heart disease, diabetes,
You're also
Alzheimer's.
a giant, which increases your risk of cancer.
My family's full of prostate and breast cancer, arthritis. I'm pretty much fucked. So.
Yeah, well, we're all fucked in some sense. At least you're really tall. I go with that for now.
For the time being, until then.
But yeah, I think sure, and so it's a really thorny problem. Problem. They call it a problem. It's a really thorny issue, and it remains to be seen how it will be resolved. But I do predict those two scenarios. More likely one being, as I said, the second one, where people just kind of surreptitiously continue their work in the lab and then pay lip service to the public good by saying, well, everyone's the same and there's no blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. So you think we're eventually going to get to the point where there'll be like the Scopes monkey trial equivalent of like IQ research?
Not necessarily in the manifestation of the Scopes monkey trial, but something not too dissimilar. For example, Jordan Peterson, whom I like for the most part. I've been working off and on a video on him for a while. I haven't been very active on that, though, recently, to be honest. He's mentioned several times that the U.S. Army disqualifies people with an IQ of 82 or lower, and that's something like 10 to 15% of the U.S. population. Now, there might be... I'm not an expert on the legal system over there, but from what I understand, basically they can't send someone with an IQ below 70 to the basically death row either, because they're considered mentally disabled if they have I have a prediction, another prediction related to this. As society itself becomes more cognitively demanding, the definition of retardation and sort of normalcy in terms of intelligence will shift as well. And so that's something that people will increasingly need to address. So it might have been, these days, what is it, like something around 65? So maybe in 30 or 40 or 50 years, if you have an IQ of 85, you're a mental invalid or a retard. And
well, I don't know if that'll ever happen, because, the IQ is, it's a statistical unit based on, the average and standard deviation. So I agree. But theoretically, the 100 mark should always be the middle of the population.
Well, true, but we can just say that regard then something like an 85 IQ or even a 90 IQ is insufficient for the purposes of societal and employment participation, right? Yeah.
Well, it's already getting that way in a lot of ways. Where we've had a lot of these discussions before, mostly in private, but some of the leaps and bounds that are happening at the moment are fairly well unprecedented. Where moving from a horse to a tractor is not a huge cognitive leap. But when you move from a tractor to a self-driving GPS-controlled tractor, the farmer that used to drive that tractor is not going to be sufficiently intelligent to retrain as a robotics engineer to maintain that tractor.
Correct.
Same thing I saw ages ago now. There's one of Vice's sub-channels called Munchies. Most of it's trash, typical Vice sort of drug-focused nonsense, but they did actually do a really good series called The Pizza Show. And one of the episodes, this guy went to this San Francisco startup, which was basically an automated pizza robot machine, and the orders would come in online through a HTML form. The robot would make the pizza and package it, and then it would go. The truck actually had a computer-controlled oven in the truck, so it would basically finish cooking when it arrived at your house. And the lady who was sort of like, I don't know I can't remember what she was, whether she was the CEO or the PR, like marketing representative or whoever, was basically saying that they employ the same number of people, but rather than having cooks in the kitchen, they now have a whole bunch of software engineers in the next room doing R&D. Now, that's fine, but those entry-level positions like, flipping burgers and putting, rolling out pizza dough is traditionally the jobs that would go to people either A, as a stepping stone out of university, while they're putting themselves through university before they, enter their chosen field of study, or it's basically the position that people with IQs of 85 used to end up in.
Yeah.
Right now the technology is really fucking expensive, but in 10 years, like it's probably only a decade away that you're going to be able to buy an automated pizza robot that's going to squish out the dough, put the toppings on, and then the conveyor belt goes into the oven. I could see that being, $20,000 to $50,000, right? It's too expensive right now, but when that technology hits the sort of $20,000 to $50,000 mark, you're talking 1 to 2 yearly wages. You could essentially get rid of all 3 kitchen staff and replace them with one robot. That's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah, and I remember discussions back in the day with the late C.S. McTow about, well, basically just automating his businesses and things, and just kind of, the more you get rid of people, the cheaper things become. And, because a business is never a charity. It's a fortuitous thing that up until now, businesses required human beings, human sort of manpower. But there won't be you can't tell a business to be charitable, because that's not what they are. They're there just to make money. That's their only goal. And provide a product, okay, but whatever. The business itself's goal is to make money for itself, the people behind it. So you can't say, well, you should just employ people because it's the right thing to do. But if they say, well, look, guy, I can save 35% every year by employing these sort of robots or these automatized whatever, why should I bother employing people, and I can make a bigger profit not doing it, then that's an issue.
I guess the problem is, though, that it is kind of mutually beneficial, because, you got the problem when everyone's been downsized and replaced by a robot, who's going to be able to afford the next iPhone? Like that 85 IQ guy that works at the pizzeria now, he's got the latest iPhone X in his pocket. So it's when all of those people are out of work, I think the whole economy's going to suffer for it, but I don't know what the answer is. I know a lot of people don't want to be hearing this shit, but it looks more and more like we'll be heading towards some type of universal basic income, just as a matter of, how society is going to function when you move to a largely automated system.
I don't disagree with that. Seems to be going that direction. I think we covered most of the stuff related to Kraut and Tea. He acted like a buffoon, made a really bad video that factually was incorrect, and he presented himself as the equivalent of young Earth creationism in the realm of genetics and evolution, and he looked like quite the dope. Unfortunate. He made a few decent videos in his time. I know you liked some of his older stuff.
I like it. I think his commentary on art and Soviet sort of culture, I think they were very good. Like I said, I don't even think his video on R&K was really that bad. He got a few things wrong, but I think they were fairly incidental to the main points. But as I said in my pseudo response to him, making those kind of videos is fine, but you got to do them for the right reasons, and I don't think he has, and he's kind of, now bitten off more than he can chew, and
yeah, and he's really let his ego and his ideology lead him to places where, I mean, if he's not in purgatory, he's approaching hell, and I think his perdition is the fiery pits are becoming fierier, more and more fiery, as it were.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's how it is, I guess.
That's how it is on the YouTubes and the internets. Moving on. In other news, it seems this is a recent German article I read. I'd have to verify it, but there's a kind of sort of Sammelklage, which is basically a joint accusation against Harvey Weinstein. Then there was some article about Sylvester Stallone. So and regarding Hollywood, there seems as Kevin Spacey has been effectively removed from the film industry and what have you. I'm sure he'll be okay financially, so no worries there. But there seems
the guy's set up for retirement, but it's interesting to the extent they're going to basically turn him into a Soviet-style unperson. He's been digitally removed from his latest film with Ridley Scott. They're apparently getting the crowbars out to remove his star on the Hollywood, what do they call it? The Walk of Fame?
Walk of Fame, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, I don't know, I kind of look at it and I'm like, I don't doubt that there's a lot of scumminess that goes on in Hollywood. Like, is Weinstein a scumbag? You bet your ass he probably is. But I don't think this whole thing of like, the evil men of Hollywood, I don't think it's that simple. I mean, you look at some of the women that have made accusations against him, like Angelina Jolie, for example, right? I mean, this is a fucking bitch who was caught no less than 12 months ago making false child abuse accusations against Brad Pitt to try and fuck him over in the family court system. And now she's going to like get up on the soapbox and talk about what an asshole Weinstein is. Like, nah, man, they're all fucking scumbags. And the thing is, it's about like, it seems to me that it's mutually exploitative.
Well, that's the nature of the male-female relationship. It's always been mutually exploitative.
Absolutely. Women trade sex for power and men trade power for sex, effectively. And I think, what's her name? Gwyneth Paltrow is a perfect fucking example of that. Like she essentially, I mean, again, you get up on her soapbox and shit talk Weinstein, but I mean, you look at her history. She basically cheated her best friend Winona Ryder out of an Oscar-winning role back in, the 90s. It was Shakespeare in Love. Guess who the fucking producer of that movie was?
Weinstein?
Yeah, so she's essentially cheated her friend out of the role, fucked the producer.
When you say she, there was an active attempt to sort of outplay her or to...
They were... I don't know the entire story. From what I understand, Winona Ryder, they were actually roommates at the time. And from what I understand, Winona Ryder was offered the part, and somehow, I can't remember whether it was like a answering machine call or a letter or something like that. From what I understand, Gwyneth Paltrow intercepted it. So Winona Ryder never found out that she was sort of offered the audition or whatever, and Gwyneth Paltrow went and poached it. As far as I know, they can't even be in the same room together anymore. But, you know.
Right. And what's the claim of Paltrow on that it's illegitimate, or the claim, or...
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if it clearly was a case of sabotage, that is to say...
As far as I understand it, Gwyneth Paltrow sabotaged Winona Ryder's opportunity to get that role. Now, the fact that Weinstein is the producer on that movie, it seems very much to me like Paltrow screwed over her friend and then fucked the producer to get an Oscar-winning role. So I'm kind of looking at it, I'm like, yeah, the poor darling, I'm sure she was so taken advantage of. Like, to me, she seems like a scumbag, and she opened her legs to get what she wanted.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, frenemies and all that jazz.
Yeah, but I mean, I just look at it and I'm like, it seems like a fairly exploitative industry from all sides, including the women that have accused Weinstein of this shit. If you ask me, it looks like a whole bunch of quid pro quo. And now that these women have hit the wall and they can't get whatever they want by opening their legs, they're going to throw anyone under the bus they can to, maintain their 15 minutes in the spotlight.
Yeah. I don't know if I've never really examined this in great detail, but I wonder I would suspect that there's a correlation between increased age in women and more limited roles obviously available to them, whereas that's not... I mean, obviously certain roles are typecast.
Yeah.
You can't play...
But I mean, the opposite is also true. I don't... Off the top of my head, I don't think they've ever awarded an Academy for Best Actor to anyone under the age of 40. That was basically the whole thing about Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean... Leonardo DiCaprio has been in, dozens of great films in really good roles, like, all the way back to Titanic. And he, basically, the contention was that he, doesn't matter what you're in, doesn't matter how good of an actor you are, you're not getting that Academy Award for Best Actor until you turn 40. And that's effectively what happened. He didn't get the Academy Award for Best Actor until the... was it called the Revenant? Reverend? The one where
Revenant,
he basically...
The Revenant, yes.
Where he trudges around in the snow and eats a fish. But, yeah, basically, that was it. It's like, the opposite is true for men. You're not going to get the Academy Award until you're over the age of 40. It's,
Or never in the case of Tom Cruise.
Well, But, I don't know. I just kind of think it seems like it was all around Hollywood is a fairly exploitative industry. And
of course.
From what I can tell, a lot of those women have been quite happy to capitalize on their sex appeal to get what they want. And then, they're starting to hit 40 and the roles aren't coming in like they used to. Yeah. So they, but I think the most horrifying one out of all of this is Louis C.K.
The comedian.
I mean, the comedian. I mean, he's a guy that, for all intents and purposes, followed the extreme feminist, mantra of yes means yes. Like, he actually sought out verbal consent. He's like, "Hey, can I show you my dick?" And it was all consensual. I'm not saying it's not. The dude's definitely a weird pervert, I get that, but he was a weird pervert that sought out verbal consent, got it, and he's still being thrown under the fucking bus. Like, Karen Straughan's proven it right again. Last generation's extremists are this generation's mainstream, to the point where even yes means yes isn't enough anymore.
Yeah, and thank the gods for drilling. And sorry, it's fucking annoying. Hopefully the audience can hear that. Can you hear that, by the way?
I can. It's not too bad.
Okay.
I can hear your voice over the top of it, but.
But yeah, I think we're arriving in a stage now where, even men who are interested in women
Yeah.
Why, it's just too risky. Is
Yeah.
it worth getting
Well,
your dick sucked off for, potentially getting your dick sucked off for
Yeah.
an accusation of rape or some criminal offense? I think not.
Yeah, well, I'm starting to get to that stage too. I've always kind of taken the kind of measured approach that, relationships, particularly marriage, are kind of like more trouble than they're worth. Like return on investment is basically down the toilet. Like in terms of investment, like if it was a stock, you wouldn't invest in it. But, I've always kind of looked at it and been like, yeah, it's kind of like drinking whiskey. Indulge in it every now and again as long as you don't become an alcoholic. But I think it's starting to get too dangerous now.
Such
it's
that
starting to
even consuming one glass might render you an alcoholic.
Yeah, well, not even that render you an alcoholic. We're starting to get to the climate of Indonesia, where people go on trips to Bali and they have like a mixed drink, but it's not actual vodka in there. They're cutting it with like methylated spirits and shit, and you end up going blind. Like the risk is just getting a bit too much, I think.
Well, that's been my view for years, as you know. So
yeah. Well, I think with me, I'm sort of looking at the whole situation and the Hollywood situation, and it's just getting worse and worse. And like I said, you look at Louis C.K. and he did the whole yes means yes thing, and he's still getting royally fucked for it. It's just too big of a risk.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the outcome won't be an accurate analysis or sort of post-production discussion of what happened. It'll be, why aren't men are so unmanly now? They don't even want to talk to women. Are they all gay? It'll be something along the lines of shaming or some lines of man-up argument. But
expect the man-up articles to ramp up.
Men don't want to approach women anymore. What's wrong with them? Are they all gay?
Yeah, I know we're constantly accusing them all of sexual assault for no reason, but it's totally Peter Pan syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, women will never take responsibility, and I mean But once again, I think evasiveness with regards to responsibility is just. I think it's just call it a spandrel, call it a hardwired trade. It helps women out. It's as Karen Strong's pointed out a million times. It's easy to work behind the scenes, pulling the strings of some guy, telling him to do different things, or subtly hinting at it, or suggesting whatever, than to be in the spotlight and just take the blame, which is the man's role. And so, I mean, I don't think we're going to get people. This is another reason why the MRM will always fail, because women need to take responsibility. Yeah, some women will. But most women won't, because it's a question of evolution. It's not in their interest to take responsibility for their actions, because that diminishes their status, it puts them in a bad light, etc., etc. There's no benefit to them to do that.
No, well, yeah, I mean, as the war bride sort of thing always shows us. I mean, they're gonna be okay, regardless of what happens. There's always going to be thirsty men to kowtow to women. Yeah. Even in a war situation. I mean, we're going back, God, I don't know, 4 years now, but you did that video talking about like the outcomes of traders in places like Belgium after the war, where, the men get shot and the women get their heads shaved.
Yeah, that's actually more like 5 or 6, but yeah, definitely. It was,
but it's one of those things where the consequences of actions, just because they are effectively the reproductive limit of the species, limiting factor of the species, they're going to be okay. The same consequences don't apply to women. Yeah. They don't have to take responsibility.
Yeah, and so they don't. And you see this, I see this online. I know this in the sort of interpersonal relationships that I'm familiar with, men have had with women, and even sibling interaction. I know the case of a exceptionally spoiled sister who of a friend of mine who gets away with literally everything, including insulting her mother, all the while demanding things from her parents. It's not shocking, but it's sort of, the world belongs to me. A small example that she wanted all these dogs for eons and then doesn't do a single bit of work to take care of them, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not saying all, but it's an extreme example of the extreme end of basically a type of female narcissism, which I think all women latently have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even to the extent that, you do get women who are, the quote-unquote good women who, like they've got jobs and stuff. They're very, very fucking rarely working the same number of hours that the guy does. No. Like there's still, like even amongst the quote good women who quote get it, they're still not contributing the same amount to these kind of relationships that the men are.
No, it's, as I said, women are women, and so you got to take them as they are. But increasingly, it's very difficult to take them as they are, as the recent flurry of Hollywood accusations and what have you. Well, it's one of those things where you kind of look at it and you're like, I just kind of, in particularly long-term relationships, I see women as a liability, but it's a question of assuming that you're willing to get into that kind of a relationship where you're going to be putting more in fiscally. And I mean, frankly, for all their complaining, I don't really see like that they really do a lot more around the house. Like, I mean, you could say women cook more meals, but I tend to find that they're not as good at cooks as men.
Well,
no, they're not really as good as men at anything, really, for the most part.
Yeah, but then you kind of got to sort of weigh up the pros and cons, and you're like, what am I putting into this versus what am I expecting to get out? And I think further and further, that's the return on investment is getting worse and worse.
It's clear at this stage, and I think it's always been the case, but at this stage, the only reason to really readily associate women and commit to a relationship is for the purposes of reproduction.
Sex.
If you really, no, not even sex, reproduction, as in you really, really want children, well, that's the only way you're going to do it. So you're going to have to countenance and deal with all the shit that accompanies female kind. But yeah, I mean, there's no other and in that case, you say you weigh the pros and cons, and if you really, really want children and offspring, then you will copulate and reproduce with the woman and deal with her shit, and that's just the end of it, pretty much.
Well, it's not the end of it. The end of it is typically, she decides to leave you, you get dragged through the family court system, and you don't get to see your kids anyway.
Hey, but you have copies of your genes out there. That's the important thing. Let's not forget that.
I guess. I always find it interesting, like, you look at some of those like action films and stuff. Terminators, the original Terminator film is a great example where, Kyle Reese ends up getting killed trying to protect Sarah Connor from the Terminator. And it's like the last 5 minutes, he's dead, but, well, at least he got to reproduce. It's like, really? Was it worth it?
Probably, that's probably something that's occurred in human history many, countless times. But yeah, apparently it is. I think this is the whole Jordan. I mean, I'm going to talk about in this video, but the Jordan Peterson argument that it's just worth it. Reproducing in itself is just worth it. But to each his own. I'm not in the business of telling men not to get married or not to I obviously I want to be left alone to my own devices. But if they think that's the costs or justify that action or that endeavor, then they should do it. I'm not going to say don't do it. Go ahead. But do not complain about the attendant consequences.
I was just about to say, like, I can't stop anyone from doing what they want. You want to get married? Fucking go for it. But don't come to me and being like, oh, Colttaine, you don't, offer any solutions to the problems. It's like, well, it's a problem of biology. If you want to avoid, it's kind of like, you can tell people all the different ways that a mousetrap works.
Oh, wait, but no, Colttaine, hold on. You should tell the audience about this in general, because because there's a backstory to the mousetrap story, right?
Well, it's just like, I get a lot of guys turn up on my channel leaving comments that it's, it's all good information, but he never offers any solutions. And it's just like, I don't know how many times you can go over all of this information and not see the obvious thing. Like, if I made a video where it's like an hour-long explanation of how mousetraps
But why
function.
are you talking about mousetraps? That's what you need to tell the
I'm
audience.
getting to it.
Okay.
I'm getting to it.
All right.
But it's like, you're going to have an hour-long explanation about all the mechanisms involved in mousetraps, what they do, how they work. And then you get comments on there going, oh, but this doesn't offer any solutions. The solution is fairly self-evident. Don't put your fucking fingers in the mousetrap. Like, I don't know how much simpler it can be. You can't, the legal environment, the biological environment, it's all just really too toxic right now. And I don't think there is a solution to it in terms of, as you said, if you really, really want to create genetic half copies of yourselves, you're going to have to deal with that, I guess. But when you think in terms of what's best for me, how am I going to be the happiest person I can be, I don't see that the best path to happiness right now as an individual, I don't think that includes a wife and kids right now. It just doesn't.
But then, I mean, there are all kinds of it. You could say that life isn't about happy. I mean, they're all look. People, like I said, people want to get married. Whatever they can, or have children. I mean, that's completely on them. They want to do that's fine.
I think life is largely about happiness. I just think that a lot of people. Well, I'm a hedonist, but I mean, even to the extent that you want to take Jordan Peterson's position, I think it's ultimately comes down to the fact that some people can't see past the limitations of their own biology, and they think that, a reproductive relationship is going to make them happy.
Yeah. Well,
like they're biologically programmed to think, a kid, passing on my kid and raising him, that's going to make me happy. I'll be a happy father. But they're not looking sort of 5 years further down the road when they're getting royally fucked in the ass in family court.
Well,
I think most people are driven largely by happiness and making themselves feel good. I mean, I don't think anyone climbs out of bed in the morning and says, all right, what am I going to do today to make myself feel like shit?
I don't know. I'm pretty good with that, especially when it comes to Overwatch. But anyway, yeah.
Well, I mean, we all have our vices in that regard. You play too much Overwatch. I drink too much, alcohol and wake up with a hangover. So, but I mean, even those goals in the immediate short term, it's the same thing. You want to play competitively and do well. I want to get my buzz on, but we're not sort of thinking about 8 hours after that when I've got to, kill a headache and you're basically, road raged out at the idiocy of teammates.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
I guess
you've actually borne witness to that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I've witnessed a few road rage situations, but I mean, yeah, I think in the most cases, whether it's Overwatch or alcohol or reproduction and, the prospect of fatherhood, I think it is ultimately people's decisions are being largely driven by thinking that it's going to make them feel good in the short term, but they're really not thinking about the long-term consequences.
Here's an idea in terms of teleology. So in purely teleological terms, fatherhood is a goal that exists for virtually every man, and it's completely accessible. I mean, all you need to do is come in a woman, all of a sudden you're father. Now, the things that come to pass after that, well, fair enough. But it's something that every man in theory could grasp and even access in a teleological sense, rather than, I don't know. It's, for example, let's say you're interested, I don't know, anything in cars. This car might not exist, a 1967 Mustang. I'm just making that up, but whatever. Let's say you want to procure a 1967 Mustang, there's money, all these, and you want to build it and make it really fast and whatever. There are things that are within reach and grasp, and things that are also just psychologically accessible. I mean, sex is something the vast majority of men want. We could also argue that most men want children or want to reproduce, make copies of half copies of their genes, however you want to put it. And so, yeah, it's in a teleological sense, it's very simple, it's very accessible. Much more so than loftier goals. I mean, let's say for some bizarre reason you wanted to master the Finnish language. Well, that's a lot more difficult than just.
Well, I would have said based on your example, rebuilding a Mustang is a lot more difficult as well. I mean, as long as you're only thinking about the. I mean, I guess it's one of those things where again it comes down to short term versus long term. Even on that respect, there is a lot of guys, like I know a couple of people involved in the sort of car rebuilding scene, restoration. I would say probably 75% of restoration projects never get finished because people buy that 67 Mustang and they're like, oh, this car will make me happy. And they buy that car, and then once it's in their possession, only then do they realize that a ground-up restoration of a car like that is a 4-year project, basically. Yeah. And they will end up doing maybe 12 months and then selling it to someone else as a half-finished project.
Yeah. So,
it's fine. I mean, do that. I've shit, man, I've started more projects than I've finished, but it's one of those things where, I mean, if you were to put it in terms, I guess it's one of those things. I mean, I've had some of those inclinations as well, but it gets to the point where you start looking at it and you're like, I mean, I refer to it as creating genetic half copies of yourself. And I never thought about it back when I was, sort of thinking, one day it might be good to be a father. But now I kind of look at all the costs and stuff involved, and that is what it is. And it'd be the same thing. Like if someone sort of sold you the Mustang to rebuild, but then they were like, oh, by the way, even after you've sold it, the government's going to garnish your wages to continue the car restoration project, and it's you're not necessarily going to get to drive it because the missus is going to take it with her 5 years later. Like if all of that stuff was explained, you might be a bit more apprehensive about, buying that Mustang. I'm not saying like don't do it. I'm just saying there are costs and risks involved with that often aren't considered. I don't know. I guess the biology, the chemical cocktail of biology, it's basically like making that decision to buy the Mustang, drop 20 grand on a Mustang project when shithouse drunk and you're not really in a cognitive state to make that decision.
And a final point on this specific topic would be that I think compared to other projects, like learning how to, well, you're a lord and master, but let's say you're a neophyte to Adobe software and you really want to get good at it, the amount of time investment. Well, it's easy to commit to your own genes basically. It's a real. I mean, the carrying out of the process is perhaps not, but it might involve work and you're tired or whatever, but the commitment is there, whereas it's much easier to sort of deflate away from the commitment you've made to some other project that's not directly tied to biological reproduction. So I think that's another thing that it's just. Like I said, it's teleologically speaking, it's accessible in terms of following through. It's accessible. It's just it's something that's easy to do in a way for most people that other things aren't. So work might be secondary to it, but you can do it because it furthers it furthers the perpetuation of your genes.
I guess so, but again, like it's one of those things where I think it seems easy on the surface. But I think, when you start looking harder and harder at what's involved, like for instance, I don't know of anyone off the top of my head who's ended up killing themselves because they didn't finish their car restoration project. But, fathers who've been dragged through the family court system, it's a different kind of issue. It's on the surface, it seems easy, but the emotional and physical tolls of some of that shit, it's pretty severe in cases.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and there's that topic, and the final topic we wanted to talk about was a lot. There are all kinds of things going on in the gaming world. Yeah, all kinds of things. Them niggas doing some crazy ass shit there. But the thing is, the most relevant and eye-opening event is this whole business with Star Wars Battlefront 2 and EA and even I don't know if you watched the most recent Yang Ye video where he talked about Walt Disney apparently got involved.
Yeah, well, I mean, Disney don't handle negative publicity particularly well. I mean, it's almost ironic given that they're what scumbags they are. I actually think the most accurate depiction of Disney was the episode of South Park that had the Jonas Brothers, where you had like Mickey Mouse was this like, coked up pusher that just, beat his talent around and stuff. And I think that's fairly apt. But yeah, whenever you look at something like, the PewDiePie affair, for example, Disney like to keep their clean, family friendly image. So when you start seeing major headlines about, EA being under investigation in, Holland and stuff for essentially putting real world gambling into a kid's game, Disney's not going to be too happy about that.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess the real issue, it's less, well, it is EA. EA is probably the worst offender possibly.
Oh, I suspect that this year, between the train wreck that was Mass Effect Andromeda and now Battlefront 2, I'd be surprised if EA don't walk away with another Worst Company in America award.
The problem, of course, with that is that EA has been nominated Worst Company. By the way, for the audience, that's not gaming company or developer or publisher or anything like that. That's company.
Yeah,
of all
worse than Goldman Sachs, worse than Monsanto.
Yeah.
EA has regularly gotten Worst Company in America.
But and here's the thing, though, that it doesn't change the fact that people are buying. I've decided, a friend of mine recently returned. He tried out Battlefront, and he just didn't like the pay-to-win model where he had a pea shooter and people dropped, $200 to get a rocket launcher or the equivalent, and just blow them out of the sky or whatever, blow them off the ground, returned it, whatever. And I'm the kind of guy who's willing to give multiple chances to people as a rule, and even companies. But EA, after I call it Mass Effect 4, that absolute train wreck, the betrayal. There have been many betrayals from EA, but no. And then, this recent business, I didn't have much interest in Star Wars anyway, but still. Would I categorically never buy a game published by EA? Well, it really depends. If the next Dragon Age got amazing reviews and it weren't just a bunch of SJWs saying, "Oh, it's great," maybe I would consider getting it on a sale. But they've done too much. But really, the real issue when it comes is the issue of microtransactions. And I'm not going to lie. I played games and I've spent money on microtransactions. It fucking, it is what it is. It's easy. It taps in the human psyche.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're obviously aware of the recent patents that Activision have filed, yes? Or actually, I think they filed them back in 2015, but they're only just starting to be granted as legal patents now.
For?
They've developed this whole new system of matchmaking where rather than being based on matching people of appropriate skill level, it's actually all designed around matchmaking to try and push people towards the online store and microtransactions.
Right. So you
I
heard about something where you get notified that you were killed by X weapon and X weapon is available for sale, blah de blah.
But it's actually like it's way deeper than that. Like they're using like AI to basically build up a very in-depth profile about what type of player you are. So if they detect that you're a player that like I know on Overwatch you're a support player,
Mostly
so it'll drop you into a game with like 10 people that are OP support players, and you'll get completely fucking demolished, and then it'll be like the people that beat you had these DLC things that are available from the online store. So it's basically it's trying to give you a shitty user experience to try and push you towards the store. And then there's also after you make a purchase, and this is all in the patent document. This is all laid out in the patent document.
Mm-hmm.
After you've made a purchase, it will switch it around. So it will put you into a game with a whole bunch of underpowered players. So it makes you feel like the purchase that you made was a good purchase. So it is absolutely tapping into the human psychology of, the carrot and the stick, punishment and then reward.
Yeah. Of course, Overwatch doesn't have. You have cosmetics, and that's about it. It has a host of other problems unrelated to pay to win, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but here's the thing: why do companies exist? Well, make money for the shareholders. I mean, what do people expect? If something works, in order to get more money for a company, or rather the shareholders, make them more. Companies will do R&D on it. They'll work on it. They'll improve that whatever system they're using in order to squeeze more money out of people. I'm done with that.
That's the whole thing now. Like the whole thing. I mean, they've sort of invented new nomenclature to talk about this stuff. Everyone kind of has their own version, but EA is now referring to their games as basically they're calling it games as services, where they don't see it as being you purchase a game and you play that game and you have fun. They see it as an ongoing service where you'll continue to pay for things.
Right. The only exception people allow for, and I would agree, are free-to-play games, legit free-to-play games. Gwent is one of them. I haven't played that in eons. But, yes, you can drop a bunch of money to get a bunch of cards that probably would give you some advantage.
Well, I mean, this is one of the interesting things as well, though, because even in free-to-play, I mean, Overwatch is interesting in itself in that even though the microtransactions are cosmetic, the way that it functions is still you are paying real money and then getting a loot box that has random items in it.
Oh, yeah.
So even though it's not pay to win, under a lot of jurisdictional laws, it does appear that it would or should be classified as gambling.
Well, I go further, actually, if I might intervene here. Though people familiar or not with Overwatch, I would argue the entire architecture of the game is effectively gambling. Literally the matchmaking is RNG too. So I lost 12 matches in a row yesterday, at which point I just stopped. Of the 12 matches I lost, I would say about 2 matches were matches lost legitimately because we got outskilled. 3 losses in a row because people just left the game for whatever reason, whether it was a DC or they just felt like it. 5 of them were just trolls. People refused to swap, make appropriate picks. So basically, cooked into the system of Overwatch, of matchmaking, you have an RNG system where you get very occasionally a really good experience where you get a good team composition, communicative people, and decent skill such that you can win at that level. It happens so rarely, though, that it's not the majority experience, and so you then repetitively keep on playing because you want to replicate that experience, and it's RNG as well because you never know who you're going to get, what you're going to get. Every match makes you feel twitchy and nervous. I'm effectively a mid-high Masters player that's right below the maximum rank. I've dipped into that occasionally. You just don't know what's going to happen, and so it's the same principle basically. Although it's not applied to buying, it's just the playing. So it keeps you playing based on the gambler's fallacy.
Yeah, I guess one of the problems is though that when you actually start unpacking this whole issue of gambling in these games, I don't like it. I don't like microtransactions, and I don't think the only DLC I've ever bought has been, I think, for Project Cars, where I bought car packs and tracks, and I knew exactly what I was getting. I've never gotten season passes or anything like that. But the problem is that when you actually start looking at it, like Overwatch with the loot boxes, for example, you're like, you're paying real money, you're getting this loot box, and it's not even pay to win, but you get this loot box and you don't know what you're actually, it's a gamble for what you've paid for. Now, this isn't a new thing, right? Have you ever played Magic the Gathering?
No, but I'm familiar with the reputation.
You're familiar. Right. Well, Magic the Gathering is effectively a physical loot box, and it goes back decades where you pay money, and it is pay to win. You have to buy card packs, and you have no idea what's in that pack, and then you have to buy more and more packs to basically build up a decent playable deck. And then if you're playing in the competition circuit, every 6 months or so, Wizards of the Coast will actually retire about a third of the cards. So you have to go out and buy more packs that you have no idea what's in them. I mean, it is the original kind of loot box pay to win. I mean, that's gambling. And that's been around for decades. And even some of the other stuff. I mean, what happens when you get to RPG style games? As an example, the biggest thing that I fucking hated about Fallout, because I was new to Fallout when I played Fallout 4. I'd never played any of the previous games. I'm mostly a first-person shooter player, and I expect that when I shoot someone in the head with a sniper rifle, that's going to be one hit to kill. Like, that's how it works in first-person shooters. Headshots are one hit to kill. But in Fallout, because it is technically an RPG, there is a random element to how much damage a shot is going to do.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it depends on the weapon and the enemy type, but yeah.
Well, it depends on it, but there is a randomized element to it. I mean, is that gambling?
Well, you have a bias towards RPGs. I don't think you understand them very well.
I have a bias towards RPGs, but there is still a certain amount of randomness that goes down. Like,
okay. So
that's what you were talking about before about, even though it's not pay to win, there is still a gambling.
Yes, I don't disagree, but with an RPG, there's a critical difference here. With an RPG, if you put in the work and grind it out, you will get there. If I put in the work and grind out my hours playing X, there's a new sport here actually coming out very soon. X here, in this case, Moira, the vampiric healer, or the hours I have on Ana, or whatever, I'm actually not rewarded. My skill, my diligence, my attempt to coordinate the team, that's not the same. So if I play Pillars of Eternity and build up a character and defeat dragon or enemy and get really good gear, I become more and more powerful. Yes, it is random in the sense that you cannot. If you're a level 1 character with a very basic two-handed sword with no magical gear, you won't be able to attack enemy X. That's true. That's the nature of RPGs. I don't really think you can liken it. It's a different type of game, but I think people are cool with that because people like the sense of progression and moving towards a goal. What people don't like is Battlefront or thing that happened in Shadow of War with microtransactions, or Overwatch RNG based competitive mode.
Yeah, and I get that, and I guess what I'm sort of saying is I don't have a problem with those RPG elements. It's not my style of game, but I don't necessarily have a problem with them. I remember playing back in the day. I used to do tabletop Warhammer, and that's very much comes down to roll of the dice. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I don't even necessarily have a problem with loot boxes in Overwatch where it's purely cosmetic and you're not play to win. It's just kind of like, I want to see what different... I don't know if you can trade stuff afterwards, so maybe it is like a collector's card thing where, you can, like with Magic the Gathering, you trade a lot of cards with people to build up the deck that you want, so you can do that. But what I'm sort of getting at is that this whole thing of what constitutes gambling kind of happens on a fairly wide spectrum. And I sort of wonder if they do start, like, the UK and Holland and stuff does actually start coming down hard on the laws of random chance and uncontrollable outcomes in games, particularly those that are aimed at children. It's kind of the question of, like, how far does that go? Like, for instance, I guess, like, even without even without the issue of real money or anything like that at all, so completely free to play, no money at all, most people are still pretty against, games that are aimed at kids that basically replicate, I don't know what you call them, poker machines, slot machines, fruit machines.
Right. Underdeveloped brains, yada, yada, yada. I get it.
Yeah, and even if there is no actual real-world money involved, it's just points on the computer screen, generally speaking, most people are against marketing those kind of games towards children.
Yeah.
So I think, I guess what I'm getting at is, even if there's no money involved, I have to wonder what the impact of some of this legislation about gambling in video games is. Yeah, I just wonder on the gradient of dice rolling in Warhammer all the way up to pay-to-win loot boxes in Battlefront 2. I just wonder where the cutoff is going to be, where some of these governments will say, rolling dice in Warhammer is okay, paying for card decks in Magic the Gathering is okay, but Battlefront's not. Like, I don't know where that cutoff is going to be.
Well, there's actually a scare related to this, which arose from a misinterpretation of an interview of the CEO of one of them. I don't know how many there are, actually. Well, a CEO or the CEO of CD Projekt Red, where they talked about something like online services, and afterwards came, and it was apparently a mistranslation. They made a declarative statement that Cyberpunk 2077 will have no microtransactions, assuring the community.
I believe the exact words used were, "We'll leave the greed to others."
Yeah. So now this is a powerful statement, but it also means that the statement is there now forever on the internet. And if they renege on that statement, and then there's some funky transactions or whatever, I don't think they're going to do it. I think CD Projekt Red is great for the consumer, not so good for the workers, apparently. There was a whole story about that I had linked you to. But they're going to stick to their guns, and there are a lot of, I keep on saying this, but the sort of indie companies, so the things like Obsidian working on Pillars of Eternity 2, there are paid expansions. They're not DLC. That they encompass entire new stories and gaming elements and whatever that you can pay for. Same with Blood and Wine and Hearts of Stone for Witcher 3. But I think that there will be a few companies that will avoid this. But as long as this is profitable and legal and effectively permissible, not just in a legal sense, but in the eyes of people in general, this practice will continue.
Well, I guess that's one of the other things to consider as well, is that EA, when you look at actually a lot of the really, really bad perpetrators of this stuff, EA, Activision, 2K, a lot of what they do is like your Call of Duties and your Battlefronts and your Madden football and all of that sort of stuff, Ubi shit and Assassin's Creed version. Like, they have 2 versions of Assassin's Creed per year. Like, it's just mass marketing that comes out. And from what I can see, most of that sort of shit is being consumed by the Dudebros. Your console owners, that they're not really what I would call your classic gamers. Like, they're kind of like, they're the football jocks that used to make fun of me in high school, but they now sit on their couch and play their PlayStation. I wouldn't really call them legitimate gamers. And I think there's definitely collateral damage. I think, Mass Effect was loved by classic gamers, as was things like Dead Space, and they were ruined by the bigger studio. But I think these bigger studios are, in large part, their main audience may not be gamers like me and you. I think.
No.
And that's probably where you are going to see more and more of this stuff coming out from companies like Obsidian.
But Colttaine, let me give you a perfect example. Really sitting concerning this, saying not being aimed at a sort of larger player base or audience. They recently, I was a bit late in backing the most recent Pillars of Eternity 2, whatever. So, but they released a pre-beta, sort of bit of like an hour or two of gameplay to the backers, and the level of complexity in that game. Now that they have subclasses, multi-classing, and we're talking about the possibility of hundreds of different combinations of classes based off of only just 11 basic classes, and then you have each class has, I think, 3 or 4 subclasses, and then every class can multi-class with a different class. And I mean, that level of complexity and detail is beyond the ken of your Dudebro or
Hell, I'll be honest with you. My main interests are in first-person shooters. I played about 2 hours of Pillars of Eternity, and I just couldn't get into like the pause combat stuff. I was right. Even for me, it's just
you got your Dudebro-ish things going on there too.
I got my Dudebro-ish things. I kind of use like video games as stress relief. Like I don't want to think too much. I just want to shoot tigers in the face in Far Cry or whatever. But I mean, I guess I still sort of see myself as a classic gamer in the sense that I was playing Doom 2 and Wolfenstein and Half-Life 1 back when gaming wasn't popular. So I mean, the games I like aren't particularly complex, but it's one of those things where I still wouldn't really put myself into the same category as the Dudebro console jocks. I did come up through the rise of video games, as it were, through the 90s and stuff.
Yeah, no, I get that, but that's the whole point. If even you can't muster enough attention, can you expect, hey man, bro, what's going on, man? Like, it's all good, man. That kind of guy to have an interest in something. As detailed as Pillars of Eternity 2. Or more recently I've been playing action RPG Grim Dawn, which is kind of a loot. It's very much sort of accumulate loot, create a build, and that's too detailed for most people. It's just shoot them in the face. Now,
I guess what I'm getting at is like when I look at like this latest controversy with EA, for example. I think the best coverage I've seen of it was Yong Ye. He's done, he does great coverage on that sort of stuff. Downward Thrust is really good as well.
Yeah, he's good too. Yeah.
But when you look at, if you look at their combined audiences, I think Yong Ye has about 300,000 subs and Downward Thrust has about 150.
No,
230.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, between, if you were to combine them, ignoring that there'd be some overlap and just take their combined viewer base, that's 500,000 people. Whereas the projected the projected sales figures for Battlefront 2 was something like 14 million units by the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I have to wonder, I think the people who care about video gaming and, have made this into a huge controversy to the point that Disney has stepped in and the microtransactions have been at least temporarily taken out. I think you're looking at maybe 5% of that game's total potential audience. I don't think those microtransactions would have affected the vast majority of Dudebros. I mean, it would have affected them, but I think the vast majority of Dudebros that game was aimed at probably didn't really care.
They're just not reflective enough, I encounter the Dudebro often in Overwatch. I sometimes play on my friend's account, an American server, and there was some guy I was mentioning this to just prior that I had to explain the term to you too, but regardless, his reaction was very telling. So there was some guy whose name was Numismatics, although it was misspelled. And to those who don't know, numismatics is the study and collection of coins and currency. I said, "Oh, is that a reference to the field of numismatics?" And then this other guy just blurts out, "What the fuck is that, man? What the fuck is that?"
Yeah.
And
yes, I've heard a few stories you've relayed about the just the anti-intellectual sentiments of the Overwatch crowd.
Yeah. So there was another one. This was on a European server. What was it? I think it was a European server. There was a guy named apoptosis. Now, apoptosis, for those who don't know, is programmed cell death in the body. It basically describes, it's one of the major reasons why we drop dead eventually. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I said, are you a biologist? Do you have an interest in biology? And not him. He was silent and saying, some of the guys says, shut the fuck up and just play the game, man. I mean, there's a kind of, I used to joke growing up about Philistines and sort of anti-intellectualism, but one thing that my friends told me attending university there is that there's not only are they actively anti-intellectual or anti-knowledge, they're proud of it. The more I remember that sort of that Chris Rock skit where he goes on about niggas being afraid of books and whatever, and they're sort of proud of being ignorant. Well, people these days, it seems, they're just like, shut the fuck up. Oh, what the fuck is that? They're proud of their ignorance of the world and their lack of knowledge about things. And I mean, I'm not saying you need to know details about numismatics. I certainly don't. I know a little bit about it, but it's just outright hostility.
Yeah, which is ironic given that we're living in a time where it's never been easier to open up a new browser window and Google it.
Precisely.
But yeah, I guess what I'm sort of getting at is I look at something like Battlefront 2, and I guess for all of Yong's great coverage of it, I have to wonder whether or not he's the target audience of that game.
Well, no. There are degrees of sophistication on a hierarchy. The problem with Overwatch, what I find is fascinating, is you get people who are Overwatch has 35 million players. We're talking about sort of IQs before.
Blizzard's perfected the.
They get people from the several standard deviations above. And so I think to play at the highest end of Overwatch, you can't operate purely out of mechanics, although you need extreme mechanics skill, which I lack. But you also need to be smart. And then you get the people who are purely just sort of grunts, like the guy who can run fast, the equivalent, but can't really think very much, who can push it pretty far just because he's fast. He's got good mechanical skills. But that's the thing. You get lumped in with people. If you're playing an online RPG, there's probably an automatic consensus that more or less people not only have the same interests, which in theory are present in Overwatch because you want to win in a competitive match, yada yada yada. But the people that they're kind of on the same par in terms of intelligence, and they're just sort of they know what's going on. You can't expect that in Overwatch. You might just get some 13-year-old kid who's fucking clueless, some guy who's fucking high off his mind. That's happened a couple of times, and that kind of thing. So it's kind of mixed, pretty mixed, I'd say.
Mixed bag, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's I don't know. It's all the gaming sort of realm is all very strange at the moment. It's kind of like this underground hobby that I grew up with has become mainstream now, and it's. I mean, I suppose there's good and bad to it, but yeah, I just I look at a lot of these AAA publishers, and they're probably more so. I mean, I still play I love GTA. I like Far Cry, although again, I know exactly what I'm getting in that game. I'm not really expecting great things from it. I just use it as stress relief. But yeah, I would tend to think that for the most part, the AAA publishers they're really not making games for gamers. I guess it would be, you would liken it to kind of like the music scene where, I don't even know what's popular these days. Taylor Swift, you know, Taylor Swift's albums. Taylor Swift isn't making music for other musicians. She's making music for the great unwashed masses, and she's going to make tons of money off of that. Your bands like I remember when I was growing up and I was sort of into a bit of the music scene, you know, we were all listening to stuff like Tool and Nine Inch Nails. They were kind of like the musos bands. They were the bands that other musicians listened to. And I guess it's probably the same where your Battlefront 2 is effectively the Taylor Swift of gaming. It's shitty pop rubbish with the same 3 chords and the same lyrics shifted around a little bit to be quickly packaged and sold to the masses. But yeah, I just the more I look at it, I mean, I do agree it's like the microtransactions and stuff are an incredibly fucking shady practice, and I think it's great that guys like Downward Thrust and Yong call that shit out. But at the same time, I think they're kind of like, they're proper gamers, and that game isn't really aimed at them. And I think if they hadn't, like, if the actual gamers hadn't turned the issue of pay-to-win microtransaction loot boxes into the international, controversy that it is right now, like I said, I think the vast majority of Dudebro gamers on their consoles wouldn't have given a shit. They'd have gladly bought all the loot boxes to try and get the best stuff that they could.
Yeah. That's the nature of the beast. A bit like people pointing out the inequities. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
A bit like pointing out the inequities towards men, in the men's rights movement, but nothing will really happen. Well, the Dudebro is there, and he's not going away, and he's a powerful force. Well, not as a singular individual, but as a collective, the collective of Dudebros, the generation of I'm proud to know nothing, and
the fact is that the overwhelming number of people are average. By dint of the bell curve, most people are average.
That's
correct. That's where the AAA market is, I guess.
For the most part, and what can you do? Fortunately, there are companies like Obsidian, their CD Projekt Red, whatever their actual employment practices are. I mean, they probably should clean that up because they'd be more efficient. But as long as they deliver a good end product, I will remain probably a consumer of them. Whereas places like EA and BioWare, where the most recent event was Mike Laidlaw, former head of everything of Dragon Age for 14 years, decided to leave, and he just left for undisclosed reasons. You got to pick and choose in the world of games, and increasingly, I did get Shadow of War, but maybe I'll just avoid the AAA companies altogether in the future. And then there's Overwatch, which such a broken game, which they could fix. Well, but why don't they? See, here's the thing: what I don't like about Overwatch, as a rule, is the fact that there are so many possible solutions and or improvements they can make that they refuse to implement. People begging for a role select so you don't end up with lopsided team compositions where nobody wants to support or tank. They don't want to do that because that would quote-unquote force the meta. I offered a monthly subscription fee so you could get an actual service which is regulated by people to get rid of the toxicity and the insanity. There's so many things they could try, but they just refuse to. Because Blizzard knows it doesn't matter if people are happy with the game, so long as they keep on playing it and recommend to other people, then get sucked in as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to Shadows of War, I mean, Warner Brothers Gaming has been infamous for not even doing that. I mean, you look at the latest Batman game that got released, I think it was Arkham Knight. they released the game completely fucking broken. The majority of PC players couldn't even get the game to basically load for the first month after release. But, it's just this attitude of, it's just a terrible console port to PC, and it was just this attitude of people will buy it and will patch it later. I don't know. I guess, as long as the people keep keep buying the pre-orders, and that shit's just going to keep happening, right?
Yeah. But it's only been in recent months that I've decided to really change my attitude towards these things by holding my purse strings on some of this. I'm tired of the practice. There's still companies that are producing decent things in my eyes. And, for example, if, Assassin's Creed Origins ever goes on a deep, deep sale where it costs €10, I might get it, but I'm not going to touch it otherwise.
Yeah. I think I picked up Black Flag on one of the Steam sales, which is apparently supposed to be one of the better Assassin's Creed games, but I don't think I've ever actually launched. I've got it installed, but I don't think I've ever actually launched the game.
Yeah, I mean, I got who's a gamer doesn't have Steam games they've never actually played properly. I mean, it's not.
I remember seeing a statistic a while ago where they were saying, because I mean, lots of shit comes up on Steam, and they were saying that something like 60% of the average Steam user's library they never play. They just, and I'm guilty of it too. I pick up shit when it goes on sale for $5 on, the summer sale or whatever. I'll pick something up for $5 and then forget about it. But yeah, apparently 60% of people's Steam libraries never get played.
Yeah, just another stat there. I mean, Dishonored was another one. The Dishonored 2, they're both good games, allegedly. I've just never really gotten into them. And it remains to be seen whether or not I will do, but yeah, but I'm pleased that there are other means of producing games, and Obsidian, like I said, I'm very because I love multi-classing and having just a multiplicity of possibilities and specializing. I mean, at heart, I'm an old school RPG guy. I'm a Dungeons and Dragons guy, so that kind of thing just tickles my funny bone. And the things I like about Overwatch are not the things that most people. I like, developing my game sense, my knowledge. Okay, the mechanical stuff I have to train because I'm old and just not very talented. But there's a kind of juxtaposition of a group of interests that doesn't really coincide with a bunch of other interests. So it's anyway.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's also, I don't know, that we've been talking for near on 2 hours, so I don't know if it's we get into it too deeply, but I mean, there's also the dark side of that too, where things like Kickstarter and Steam's Greenlight have caused a massive surge in, anything that ranges from complete vaporware to something that does actually come out but is just a shoddy shit inferior product. Early access on Steam, I think, there's very few games that have come out on Steam, I think, through early access that have, sort of reached fruition. There's a few Kerbal Space Program and stuff, but for every Kerbal Space Program, there's like 3 DayZs where it's been in early access for like 4 years now and basically hasn't progressed any.
Yeah. But I mean, it's established that, or it is rather established that companies that have a previous reputation do best with things like Kickstarter and crowdfunding, as is the case with Obsidian.
Well, I mean, in the case of DayZ, I mean, that's actually fucked a lot of people over, because the actual standalone release of DayZ was basically backed by the company that made Arma 2, or the Arma series of games. And they basically hired the guy, I can't remember what his name was, but the New Zealand guy that made the DayZ mod, they actually hired him and gave him a team, and it's just gone nowhere. People bought the early access game, and as far as I know, it's still broken as fuck.
Yeah, well, it's
I think I don't know, Kickstarter is one thing, early access. There seems to be a lot of problems associated with these smaller companies where they try and get people to pay up front for a product that doesn't yet exist.
Yeah.
So I guess it comes down to, caveat emptor.
Yeah.
Or however it's pronounced. I probably butchered that, but
caveat
emptor.
Yeah. Let the buyer beware.
Buyer beware. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a good sense of what's going on in the gaming world these days, and what would appeal to me and what not. And it helps to be able to navigate these things. So I'm
very selective about stuff that I buy. I've got a few things that I want to buy, but my purse strings have been a bit tight lately. But on a typical game, I'll sink anywhere. On a game that I like, I'll sink anywhere from 50 to 100 hours on it.
I do actually. I forgot to mention before we end this. I have a deep concern for whenever it comes out. When I'm about to drop dead, maybe, because it'll be 50 years from now. The next Elder Scrolls, because they had this whole Creation Club controversy, which I won't go into here because it would just extend it beyond the pale here. But I tried to play the game and I couldn't access my mods without signing this Creation Club. And apparently there's some bug if you don't have an American keyboard. You can't, your @ sign doesn't work, and I just uninstalled Skyrim. So I wanted to get back into it a bit. If they have that shit going on in the next Elder Scrolls, I don't know. They're on very tepid ground right now.
Well, it's not even. I don't even know if that's. I mean, that's a big problem. I don't think it's a problem that would affect me because
but dude, Elder Scrolls. People have been asking this for years, and if it comes out a piece of shit, well, that's another.
See, I think the bigger problem would be because they've effectively said, and having played Fallout, because that's really the only Bethesda game that I've played.
Yeah, their worst one yet too. So there you go.
Well, worse or not, I'm coming at it purely from the standpoint of somebody who likes his first-person shooters. And when that came out, I was also playing Wolfenstein, the New Order, and The Witcher 3. I was playing, and they're for a full-price AAA release, the graphical limitations in Fallout were really visible. And I don't know enough about Bethesda. They've effectively said that any new Elder Scroll game probably isn't going to come out until 2022 because they have to basically build a new engine from scratch.
I'm aware, and they're working on all these other projects, and I have followed it. Yes, I know.
Here's the thing, though, is that one of my, like I said, I don't know much about Bethesda. But one of my friends who knows more about it basically told me that Bethesda have been saying that shit for over a decade, and there are still problems in the current engine that have basically existed since Morrowind.
Yeah.
And he was like, they say they're going to make a new engine, but it's whether or not they actually do that or they just bring out
too busy working on other IPs.
Well, yeah, but I mean, other IPs still need an engine to run on, and he's sort of questioning whether or not they're just going to do a couple of graphical improvements and bring out essentially the same 20-year-old broken engine that the last game ran on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the joys of the gaming world are shrinking, but they're still there. One would hope that they'll still be able to knock out a very good Elder Scrolls game eventually, if we're still alive by then. But hey, I guess we'll see. Anyway, we've been talking for quite some time. I think we covered all the topics, more or less, that we intended to cover. There probably isn't any ETA on any topics you're looking to cover soon. I know you're quite busy with other things. So.
Yeah, I'm busy with other things, and I don't know, I'm sort of writer's block or whatever. I don't know. I'll get around to something when I feel like it, but, just real life.
You heard it from Jesus' lips to yours. Get around to it when it feels like it, as they say.
Yeah, well, I sort of, we'll see what happens.
All right. Well,
right.
and if he doesn't, there's at least this. You can hear his lovely kangaroo twang in this discussion.
Yeah. G'day, mate.
No. Anyway,
Right.
I will thank my guest, Colttaine, the greatest of Australian content producers, for joining me. And I hope you enjoy this discussion. Maybe you learned something, maybe not. In any event, I will bid you adieu and hope to encounter you the next time if I'm still alive. So take care. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.